Tonight, tropical weather bulletins make a return. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical weather bulletin for May 15th. Good to be back, although the tropics haven't quite arrived yet, but that's okay. No tropical cyclones active right now. We've seen 25 so far this year, but there are a few little areas that might be bubbling up in the next few days. And I'm sure many of you will have heard about some of these. Let's take a look at the basins. Well, in the Atlantic, it's 17 days until hurricane season, and some of you may have been expecting us to mark a potential system in the Western Caribbean. It's still too early for our range. No areas of interest at present. In the Eastern Pacific, it is day one of hurricane season. We're back, but there's nothing active right now. No areas of interest. Just one small area that we were watching a few days ago has now vanished and faded into nothing really. In the Western Pacific, there's nothing currently active right now either, although there are some inklings from one or two models that we may get something in the South China Sea fairly soon, but they've been saying that for quite some time and quite on a few occasions, so I don't think that's going to happen just yet. In the Indian Ocean, there is one area that we can give a 10% chance on for something that could develop in the eastern Bay of Bengal and indeed over the Andaman Sea in around 4 or 5 days' time, that could go on to affect Myanmar, particularly with high rainfall. So, looking at satellite imagery around the world, first of all the Atlantic, dry air dominating, but you can see there a little channel of moisture which extends from the Central Caribbean through the Sargasso Sea area and eventually off towards the northeastern United States. But generally dryness is dominating. The Eastern Pacific, same too actually, and towards the east there you can see a few little blobs blowing up. That's probably what you'd expect from the very early season. Things will be slow to start and maybe slow from start to finish in the Eastern Pacific given the La Nina in full flow. The Western Pacific right now is also stalling. You can see the frontal pattern that's now emerged over Taiwan towards the Japanese islands. That will be quite dominant over the next few months, but you might just get something forming on the tail end of that front once in a while, as we may well see in the next week. In the Indian Ocean, you can see what's going on here. Generally, and sorry about the flashing there, the blackness, it's that little area near the southern tip of India that will eventually transfer its energy eastwards towards what we're looking at, that 10% later in the week. And this is just a little look at the Australian region as well, and you can see the Western Pacific up there as well. Looking at a fairly quiet picture overall. A lot of flare-ups in the usual areas in the tropical zones, and as always these can always cause flash flooding. Sea surface temperatures at a first look on May 15th, well, a few areas of 30 degrees Celsius waters, but the La Nina effect is quite clear to see even on the normal sea surface temperatures there to the south near the equator. The Atlantic 26 degrees into the Gulf of Mexico quite comfortably already, a few areas of 28 even north of Cuba there, and the Gulf Stream 26 poking up towards South Carolina. So decent temperatures in those homegrown areas that we'll be expecting in the early days of the season. The Indian Ocean, very warm indeed. You can see a little bit of a cool pool after Cyclone Asani last week, but the eastern side of the Bay of Bengal, very warm, 30 degrees plus. Same too in the South China Sea. The Philippine Sea catching up a little bit, still got a way to go, around 28 degrees Celsius, pushing 29. So looking decent in those areas. Up towards Taiwan, pushing 26 along there. The East China Sea still got a ways to go before it warms up yet. Sea surface temperatures, anomalies I should say, and you can quite clearly see the La Nina in effect, and how long that continues for is an unknown quantity. Some suggesting that it might collapse later on this year, in the late phases of this year, but I don't think anything will save the Eastern Pacific from having a below average year. And this is ocean heat content, little areas that show though we might get some storms tapping into some energy down there that extends below the surface. Atlantic looking decent for the time of year, to be honest, possibly top 5. In the Eastern Pacific you've got that small area of good conditions, and in the Western Pacific you get quite a bit. They have a lot of fuel and that is normal. Let's take a look at the next 5 days on the computer models. We split these up into 3 banks now. We'll first look at the 5-day picture, then the 5 to 10 days, and then we have silly models at the end, which aren't as interesting for the normal person. But in the Atlantic you can see that at the very end of that 5-day period on the GFS model, that little thing starts to develop off the coast of Nicaragua in the southwestern Caribbean. You'll see it again here poking up and starting to get a rotation. There it comes, off Colombia and into Nicaragua at first, and then off Honduras, and it will develop further. The Eastern Pacific, you can see that little area that we're still monitoring just a little bit, and starts to get some stronger winds there just briefly as it moves along towards the west. Doesn't look like it gets a circulation. Even then, a tropical depression is not a given, as it has to display convection and sustain it for some time. It's probably just going to be a feature of the intertropical convergence zone, and I don't think we'll see anything further. There's even a little interesting area in the Central Pacific there, if you can see it, that's going to be pushing up northwestwards and then curving northwards, well to the southwest of the Hawaiian Islands. Just thought we'd show this one, but for Hone fans out there, I think it's going to be another grim year, unfortunately. Sorry, not sorry about that, as this system curves towards the north. What else are we looking at? Well, this is the Indochina region, and you can see the GFS will develop 2 systems, the one near Myanmar, there it is starting to develop now, and one near Hainan Island, a very small tropical cyclone that develops there towards the end of the 5-day period. Both of them visible on that imagery. The one near Myanmar is the more interesting one and more important because it could deliver huge amounts of rainfall that will affect over 12 million people. That's why it was marked code blue on TCOS. And this is a little look at the South Atlantic. This is actually the old 12Z run. The 18Z run doesn't bear thinking about, but this is just really a public service announcement for southern Brazil and Uruguay that they could get hurricane force winds in around 4 or 5 days time, 3 or 4 days now actually, when this system circles around a larger low pressure center and brushes the coast. A very eccentric track that will be if it happens. Now, looking at precipitation totals across the Atlantic basin, you can see that channel continues over Cuba mainly, delivering various amounts of rainfall, and then the reds creep in the southwestern Caribbean from that next system that might form. You can see there in the 5-day period you're looking at 12 inches over water, admittedly, but that is certainly a sign that something tropical is brewing. Whether it becomes a cyclone or not still remains to be seen. Looking again at the Indochina region here too, and you'll see that those colours really bloom up near Myanmar once again there towards the end of this period. Starting to see some pink out there and the red starting to creep up there again, and you can see there some decent rain amounts, widespread amounts over 10 inches, which is pretty much where the red begins. So that is 250 millimeters of rain. That's usually the cutoff of what we call quite significant, and you can see some isolated high amounts of rain out in the South China Sea as well. Over the Philippines, maybe towards 250 millimeters. In the longer range, this is mid-range, so take this with a pinch of salt really. This is what happens to the Atlantic system in the Southwest Caribbean, and look at that, it decides to develop into a hurricane and then head towards southern Florida. I would not bet on this with any confidence yet. This is the 5 to 10 day period. There's a reason National Hurricane Center cones still don't go out beyond 5 days yet. They're not confident enough. So it's something to watch, but not something to be confident about. And this is the longer range as well in the Western Pacific predominantly. That small system pushes through the northern Philippines and then gets absorbed in that long front. You can also see the remnants of that system in the Bay of Bengal dying off at the beginning of that loop. But in general, it stays fairly quiet with those small, short-lived systems. Now that we've got the important stuff over and done with, we're now doing custom storm animations on Teespring on the Force 13 store. It's our newest edition, along with all the merch that we do. So if that tickles your fancy, then why don't you go check it out, store.force13.com. And this is the Scilly range, and you can see that hurricane moving off towards the northeast and just plows right into Maine as an extremely powerful, is around 956 millibars, ridiculous hurricane strength storm, probably just turning post-tropical there. That would be one for the record books if that happens. That's new from the 18Z GFS model run. Don't listen to it. I don't really know what else to say about that, but we've had our moment of silly. So on this day we had another moment of interesting times back in 2020. On May 15th we were covering Typhoon Vongfong, who made landfall the previous day as a Category 3 and has gone down to a Category 1 by this point as it was moving over the Philippine Islands. It's obviously quite a devastating storm for the region. It retained its power for quite some time. It's one I remember quite vividly covering back in the wacky year of 2020 in all aspects. It was the only thing active on that day though, back in 2020, and that was on this day. So moving forward to today, the first name on the Atlantic naming list is Alex, get used to it. The Eastern Pacific, Agatha. The Central Pacific, definitely get used to this one, it's Hone, and it's been nearly 3 years of me saying that now. In the Western Pacific, the next name on list 4 is Chaba. In the North Indian Ocean, we're now looking out for Sitrang. As mentioned earlier, 25 storms have formed so far this year. I think 27 depressions that didn't become named storms. In the Australian region, if we get anything else, it'll be Dominic next up. The Southwest Indian Ocean, Letalama, and in the South Pacific, we're looking out for Gina. We'll have another tropical weather bulletin, as expected, tomorrow.